Okay, here we go. Detective Davis and Gregory interview. Take one.
Hang tight just 1 second, guys, and Juan will give you the cue.
All right, Michelle, whenever you're ready.
So the first thing we do is just have you say your names and spell them for us.
Kim Davis, Kim Davis.
Rocky Gregory, ROCKY GREGORY.
Detective Davis, can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you went to school, and why you decided to become a law enforcement officer?
I'm from Bethany, Oklahoma, and I went to school in Oklahoma City. I went to high school in Oklahoma City. Then I went to college at the University of Central Oklahoma and graduated from there. And I went into the workforce, and I didn't like it. I didn't like 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. I didn't like sitting behind a desk, and I wanted something different every day, and I wanted something that was going to be a challenge every day, and so I decided to go into law enforcement.
So what were you doing before you became a cop?
I was the secretary, and it was horrible, and it was boring.
Yeah.
And I needed something exciting. I'm kind of an adrenaline junkie, and I wanted something different every day and something exciting, and so I applied to be a police officer.
And have you always been in the sex crimes unit, or what did you do before then?
No, anybody that hires on, at least with Oklahoma City, you have to ride in a scout car. Mm-hmm. So I did that for 11 years, and then I went into investigations, and I was lucky enough to go straight into sex crimes because that was my ultimate choice of investigation.
Why?
I had received some training on it and kind of followed a detective that worked in sex crimes, and I really liked him, and I liked the classes that he put on. And then when I was in a scout car, just anytime I would get a sexual assault call, I just liked those better. Not that I liked to see somebody be the victim, but I liked the investigative part of it and working those kind of calls.
Would you call it a calling then?
Yeah, I guess. I just had a passion for that, and I had a heart for those kind of victims. There was other types of crimes that just didn't interest me, and I didn't have a passion for that. And so I guess you could call it a calling.
How about you, Detective Gregory?
I grew up in a farm, northwest Oklahoma, Ames, Oklahoma. I went to Northeastern State for my bachelor's degree for criminal justice. I always wanted to be a cop. Grew up watching John Wayne movies and things. Got on the department in 2000 and worked my way into becoming a detective. And like Kim, I just wanted to be a sex crimes detective. So I did a year in domestic violence, and then went into sex crimes, and then eventually homicide. But I got on sex crimes because I have 3 daughters, and I just felt very protective of them, and I felt like that I felt like I had that kind of protection that I'd like to kind of show others a little bit too.
And how long had each of you been in the sex crimes unit before the Holtzclaw case came along?
I'd have to do the math, but I went into sex crimes in March of 2001.
Okay.
I think I was in about 5.5 years.
And about how many cases had you investigated before this case?
We generally keep a case log in each year, and we would average about, or I know that I would average about 100 a year, a little over 100 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Same thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about, before we get into some of the specifics of the case, a little bit about the climate, not only around the trial, but in terms of where America has been in perceiving law enforcement. Is that something that was palpable here in Oklahoma City the way that it has been in Ferguson and Dallas and LA and Chicago and New York?
No. I don't feel that it's been that way at all.
Race relations was not a problem here in Oklahoma City?
Not like you see on TV. I mean, I'm sure there's always going to be some of that, and it was minor, but we never had riots or people protesting and boycotting down here. We just didn't have that issue here. I mean, I know that there's some, like you'd go arrest somebody and they might make a comment or something, but it was never like big group efforts of trying to go against the police or say the police were doing bad things or that they were racist. We didn't have that problem here.
Do you agree with that, Detective Gregory?
Oh, yes. I felt like, I know things have kind of changed even since the Holtzclaw trial and some of the big things like Ferguson. I know that the climate has changed across the country, but I agree with Kim that our relationship with the African American community has actually been fairly good. Oklahoma City hasn't gone through the trial and tribulations a lot of places have. I know like Tulsa up the road and, the 20s, 30s, they kind of had some race riots back then. But Oklahoma City really hasn't had to face that. And
Do you think that people, say, in the northeast part of town, would agree with that assessment?
I think some of them would. I think some of them wouldn't. And like I said, if we would go to a particular house, maybe there might be comments made, but there was never joint efforts or group efforts like you see.
Comments like what?
You're just doing this because I'm black. Or you don't care because I'm black. I mean, individuals would make comments, but there was I never went anywhere where there was big groups of people yelling at us, making comments, protesting us. It was never rallied like that.
And so prior to the Holtzclaw case, would you say that the police chief had never had the kind of difficulty in dealing with people in Northeast or in the black community the way that other police chiefs had?
I think we should probably stay away from what the chief does.
I was going to say, I don't know what the chief does anyway, so I'm just speaking as a,
The chief speak for himself.
Right.
as an
Okay, but
individual.
I'm talking that's not just about the police chief specifically. It's about whether the police department had race relations problems prior to the Holtzclaw case.
As an individual detective, we never saw it. I never saw it as an individual detective. But we don't see in our desks and our offices, we don't see the things that the department deals with as a whole. I mean, we get our 100 cases a year and we put our nose to the grindstone and we go work our cases. We don't see the big picture of what the city deals with or what the chief's office deals with. We are just dealing with our individual cases and our individual victims and suspects.
Gotcha. So let's turn to this case in particular. How many hours do you think you spent on this case?
Oh my gosh, thousands?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you put everybody's efforts into it, and thousands.
Would you characterize it as the biggest case of your careers?
Yes.
Yes.
And was this the kind of case, I'm sure you had other cases that kept you up at night, but is this the kind of case that just kept you, riveted the entire time, from the time that you started until the very end and the verdicts were announced?
I think so. I mean, it's...
You talked about your daughters. Did you think about them when you were investigating this case?
Yes, I did. Actually, my daughter now wants to go into law enforcement. Kim and I both had our children up there around the time we was going through the trials. They got to witness it. They're both of age to go through the process and kind of appreciate some of the things that went on. And I feel like that, they, what do I want to say here?
It was I'm going to say it was the hardest case that I've ever worked. We've worked other serial rape cases that keep you up at night, and that we try to take pride in doing the best that we can on every case, but this one was just different. And you can't just work 8 hours a day on it and then leave it. I mean, we took it home, our families dealt with it, which is kind of one of the reasons why we let our kids come into the courtroom and see, because they kind of
Really?
lived
That's
it.
interesting. How old were your kids when you let them in the courtroom? to watch
18.
all
Mine
this?
was 18.
18.
Yeah. What are some of the adjectives that you'd use to describe Daniel Holtzclaw?
Narcissist,
Psychopath.
evil. He didn't think he did anything wrong. He puts himself above these women, and therefore he didn't do anything wrong.
Did you know him before Ms. Liggins entered your worlds?
No.
No.
And so the assessment of him as these words that you called him came from your years of experience in dealing with other serial rape defendants?
I say the adjectives come from dealing with the victims and interviewing the victims and seeing how the victims were treated is how we came up. And then obviously interviewing him. And just through the whole investigation, you get a sense of who your suspect is or who your perpetrator is, and that's where the adjectives come from.
How many times did you interview him?
Just once.
One time.
For how long was that?
It was at least a couple hours.
Yeah, it was over
It's
2
probably
hours, I
42.
know.
Is there any kind of standard procedure in cases like this, which Detective Davis, you've said that there was something very unique and different about this case. Is it sort of the usual procedure to interview an accused person like this just once? Did it ever occur to you that you should interview him more than once?
He refused to be interviewed again. So, I mean, we didn't have a choice. We only got to interview him once.
He refused to be interviewed more than once by you?
Right. Once the first interview, he sought an attorney, and that attorney advised him not to be interviewed again.
Okay. And so what were your feelings during those more than, like you said, it was more than 2 hours of the interrogation as you went along? You used some certain adjectives to describe him. What did you feel about his demeanor compared to the way that others you've brought in for cases like this?
It's a little different. We've both investigated officers in the past, but so it's a different dynamic. They kind of know a lot of the tricks of the trade that we do. They've watched plenty of our interviews when they bring other suspects down that they've arrested. So we have to kind of have a different tactic in speaking with him. I think throughout the time period we were with them, we could kind of sense that we had to kind of gain rapport with him and things like that. But I think as the interview went on, you could start kind of seeing the type of person he was.
But before you started the interview, did you have a sense that that he did the things that Janie Liggins accused him of doing?
Before we started the interview, I felt like that what Janie told me was the truth, yes.
Okay. How about you, Detective Gregory?
I didn't get to talk with Janie. So, and getting with Kim, and I know that we both had victims, that everything kind of matched up. And kind of like with any suspect.
I'm sorry, everything matched up. What matched up, and what are you talking about?
Well, I had a victim, Terry Morris, and her description of her assailant matched up what Janie Liggins, her description of her assailant was, and everything that transpired during both their assaults kind of matched each other.
MO, if you will.
I understand that. But how long after you interviewed Janie Liggins did Terry Morris come into the picture?
Terry was actually first.
Right, but you only found out about her after Janie Liggins came forward.
No, Terry was first.
Okay.
Terry, she got high one night and had a slight domestic with her boyfriend officers show up. This was at the end of May, and Janie's deal was in June,
Right.
Right.
beginning of June. She tells the officers that she was assaulted by a police officer. They made the police report, and then that was then sent to me. It was assigned to me. I then spent like 2 weeks trying to find her. By the time I was able to locate her, she again was high, and then she refused to cooperate. She said she was moving to California, didn't want to do anything. I sensed that there was something that did happen, but she wouldn't look at a photo lineup. She actually told me a wrong location to kind of throw me off a little bit.
But why would she do that?
Well, she explained later on when she got sober, the reason why is because she knew was going to dig into it, and she didn't want the boyfriend to know that she fell off the wagon, and the location where her assault occurred was actually at where she usually buys dope from, and she didn't want her boyfriend to know that she was buying dope.
So she lied to cover something up that she didn't want her boyfriend to know.
That's right. And then actually I was...
So this is why the GPS information didn't match up with what she had initially said?
That's right, yeah. She said...
So she changed her story
She did change her story.
more than once?
She stuck to what happened and never changed on what happened for the assault. What she changed was just the location.
Okay. So from what I understand about that specific case, she said that Daniel Holtzclaw picked her up at her home. Is that right?
No, she was walking in a complex on the northeast side.
Right.
And they saw each other. She went walking. He goes around, drives around to her, puts her in a car automatically, drives her about 2 blocks away.
Uh-huh.
And then that's when he assaults her.
And she said that it took about 10 minutes for him to do that. Is that about right?
Yes.
But the GPS doesn't show that.
GPS does show that.
That he stopped for 10 minutes?
This is the way she did when she was sober and she told me what happened, okay, is that I can GPS where he went from that apartment complex. He goes and stops at the location. He puts himself out to dispatch, and then he clears that traffic stop. Terry, I know, was still in that car because she tells me the exact direction that he went. I mean, he zigzagged around the neighborhood.
Does the GPS show that?
Yes,
That he zigzagged
yes,
in a pattern?
yes. The way she related, the only how she would have known that is by actually being with him, because some time had passed by the time she was sober and told me that. But it was to the T of how he went. But he cleared off that traffic stop. He said he was done, but he still had her in the car.
And then he did this and then drove her around the corner again and dropped her off?
She was begging to, it was a oral sex assault. After that, she thought, hey, he's going to let me go. She wanted out of the car because she thought if she did that, everything was going to be fine. She wanted to be dropped off at her uncle's house down the street. He said, well, I'll take you because I want to make sure you're safe. They start heading that way, but he goes off into a different direction. That's when he zigzags in through the neighborhood.
And the GPS shows that he zigzagged?
Yes.
Okay.
He pulls into, and this is what Terry said, he just briefly stops at a open field by a street like he's getting ready to turn into it. Terry says she starts to scream, and that's when he's like, calm down, and then he drives her around and does drop her off.
When she screamed is when he assaulted her?
No, the assault had already taken place.
Okay, but then he stops for a brief, like how much time did he spend stopping?
It was just seconds.
Okay.
And even on that part, GPS, it was just so brief. He has quick little stops, but I couldn't determine off of GPS how long he had stopped there. But she said it was just real brief. She was afraid that she was going to be hurt even further because the oral sex only lasted just a short period of time, seconds. So she thought that he was going to really assault her, and that's when she did scream, because she thought since what she already did to perform oral sex, now she's over at this other location, and she feared that he was going to step it up with her.
So the story evolved because she feared her boyfriend. The story did not evolve because she was trying to match the narrative that you had in mind.
Right. The only reason she gave a different location, again, was because, if you remember, she had the domestic with her boyfriend and other officers were there. So she didn't want her boyfriend hearing where the assault took place, because then that was going to cause a problem behind closed doors. He was going to know that she was on crack again.
She was trying to cover up her drug use. Is
That's
what you're
exactly
saying.
it.
Okay. Now, so that preceded the night that Daniel stopped Janie Liggins by a month, is what you're saying.
It was about close to 3 weeks.
Okay. So take me back to that first moment when you got roped into this case.
I was the on-call detective for the sex crimes unit, and got a call in the middle of the night saying that we've got a lady that's saying that she was assaulted by a police officer.
And who called you?
The sex crimes lieutenant did,
Okay.
because lieutenants rotate, and he was the on-call supervisor.
Was that
called me.
Lieutenant Musney?
He went,
Okay.
yes. He met me at the hospital, but the victim was at the hospital when they called, or headed to the hospital. And so I said, I will meet you at the hospital with the victim. And then once I arrived at the hospital, I got briefed, briefly by the patrol supervisor, and then I went in and interviewed.
And who was that?
Is it Wegner that used to be in assaults? Is that his name, Wegner?
Wegner.
Lieutenant Wegner.
Okay.
And he briefed me. And in the back of my head, I knew that Rocky was working another assault involving a police officer, but I didn't know the details of it.
Okay, so when you got to the hospital, you had that case in mind?
I knew he was working one involving a police officer. I didn't have any details. I just knew he was working one.
Okay. And so it's, what time of the morning is it?
Oh, it's
After
3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, right. And then what happened?
Then I went into the room, the examination room where Janie was, and I interviewed her. And then when I was done interviewing her, her family, I interviewed some of her family members that were in the waiting room at the hospital.
And knowing what you just said, that Detective Gregory had this case that he was working on, did it occur to you that you should record the interview?
No,
Why not?
no. Generally, we do not record victim interviews. We don't record victim interviews except involving police officers. We never have recorded victim interviews.
Okay, but this one involved a police officer.
It did, but I had no equipment to record it, and it didn't even cross my mind to record it. We're in the middle of the hospital, and it's not something we do. We don't take a recorder to the hospital and do interviews. When we're not called out and we're assigned a case and victims come downtown for their interviews, then we have the capability to record if it's an officer involved. When we go out into the field and do hospital interviews, we don't have the capabilities to record. We don't have the equipment to record in a hospital.
You don't use your phones for interviews?
No. I wouldn't even know how to record on my phone if I did.
You wouldn't?
No, I have no idea. I text and I call, that's all.
I'll vouch for her. She does not.
I'm not tech.
Okay.
I'm not techie at all. And again, there are personal phones.
Yeah.
They're not the city phones.
So if you had recorded on a personal phone, you wouldn't be able to use it?
No, it's policy. We cannot even take a picture with our personal phones and use it as evidence. That is policy.
Defense could subpoena our phones.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's
It's-
our personal phones, so.
Yeah, and it's police policy. We do not use our personal phones to take a picture or to do anything. I mean, I would get in trouble for that.
You don't carry work phones with you that you
We're
can
not
use?
provided with work phones.
Wow, okay. But you've both said you sort of had a sense that you knew there was something different about these allegations and about this accuser.
After I interviewed Janie. Yes, just going in. I never go into an interview with a predisposed idea.
But you had it in mind that
No, I
detective-
knew
Okay.
he was working an officer.
Right.
I didn't know the details. I didn't know if it was good. I didn't know if it was false. I just knew he was working an officer because we all know in the office when someone's working an officer.
Okay.
So then I go in and interview Janie. After I talked to Janie, I was like, still not knowing about his. I was like, something happened to Janie.
Not knowing about who the officer was, or
Not knowing about his case.
I
I'm
see.
just focusing on Janie. And I interview her for a couple of hours. After I interviewed her, I'm like, something happened to her.
So what was it? I mean, describe that for us because of your experience and because of what you know. What was different about her?
Her demeanor, hysterical at times, bawling at times. She had no motive at all to make this up. I mean, why would you go to the hospital and put yourself through a sexual assault exam and put yourself through accusing a police officer? Because I'm sure that was not fun for her. There's no motive. He didn't give her a ticket. He didn't threaten to put her in jail. There was no reason for her to make it up.
So describe for us, for somebody who did not follow the case very closely or at all, what exactly she was doing when she got pulled over and where she was. Tell us a little bit about that area and the circumstances of the pullover.
She had left a friend's house and was going home. And she was at Northeast 50th and Lincoln, and that is business area. It's not residential. She had left a residential area, but she was driving. It's a major intersection in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I did drive by there, and we took the crew there, and it is very busy.
Yes.
And sort of up high on a hill and very visible.
Right. It's a major intersection surrounded by businesses. None of the businesses were open. They were like they weren't like convenience stores or something that would be open 24 hours a day. They were
it's
all
2 o'clock in the morning.
right,
Yeah.
and they were all closed.
Yeah.
And she was just west of Lincoln when she was pulled over. I think he engaged his lights as she was getting close to Lincoln, and she got just west of Lincoln when she pulled
So
over.
there's an intersection there, and there's a traffic light.
Right.
Right. And she had obeyed the traffic light before heading
West.
west
Correct.
on
50th.
50th. Right.
Right.
And she told him she was going home.
Yes.
Is that where her home is, that way?
Yeah, her house is west of that location, yes.
Okay. And so that would have been the proper way for her to go home, not turning right on
She could
Lincoln?
She could have turned north on Lincoln to get on the highway, but he engaged his overheads prior to her making that turn. So I guess she decided to go through the intersection and pull to
pull
the
over
right.
there instead
Yeah.
of maybe pulling over.
Right.
But she hadn't signaled that she was turning that way.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
And she could have gone home. She could have drove straight down 50th
To get to home.
To get home, yes.
Okay. And then what happened, according to her?
He approached her vehicle and had her get out of the car, and he put her in the back of his car, and then started questioning her. Have you been drinking? What's in your cup? Because she had a styrofoam cup in her console. What's in your cup? Do you have anything on you? If you have anything on you, you need to tell me about it now. What am I going to find? Kind of making, accusing her of having some narcotics on her. what have you been using? What am I going to find if I check you? Do you have any warrants? Things like that. And she was answering all of his questions. She did not have a valid driver's license.
Right.
Um,
And she hadn't had one for a long
She
time,
hadn't had
from what
one
I
in a long-
understand.
Right, like 15 years.
Is that weird?
No, that's,
Around here, it's not?
no.
No.
Okay. But would it be weird for somebody who's been characterized as sort of, your prototypical grandma?
It's not weird. People don't have driver's licenses all the time.
Okay, I think it was closer to
it-
30 years, not 15, that she hadn't
And you
had
may
one.
be right, I
Yeah.
don't remember. It gives a reason, it completely justifies putting her in the backseat of a scout car
Uh-huh.
to check her, but he never checked her. If I pulled somebody over and didn't have a driver's license, I would put them in the back of my car, run their numbers, see if they had a good driver's license, but they just didn't have it on them, to see why they didn't have a driver's license. Was it suspended? Was it revoked? To see if they had warrants. The problem was he didn't do any of that.
So let's go back to the hospital.
Okay.
Can you explain what a SANE test is and what exactly it tests?
SANE stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. And we have specialized nurses that do the SANE exams. And it depends on the allegations of the assault, but they do, if it's a rape, they do the vaginal canal, anal canal. On Janie, that wasn't done because it wasn't a vaginal rape. She was saying that it was oral assault. So they swab the mouth, they do a rinse and have them spit that back into a vial. They swab anywhere that the officer or the perpetrator might have touched her. And then they collect the evidence, package it, and then turn it over to a police officer who books it into, we have lockers, and then our serologists get it out of the locker to be analyzed.
So what were the results of the SANE test with regard to Janie Liggins?
There was no DNA in her mouth, but she said that he did not ejaculate, because that is obviously a question that we ask. He put it in her mouth for just a few seconds.
She also said that he put, at one point, his hands were on top of the car, and at one point, her hands were
Yes.
on the hood?
On the hood, yes.
And what were the results of the DNA tests on those?
They didn't DNA test those, they fingerprinted. You can't do
And-
both.
Okay, and what were the results of that?
They didn't get fingerprints.
Why do you think that is?
Because hundreds of people touched the cars, the weather, you got to keep in mind, Holtzclaw's car was a pigsty. It was absolutely nasty. And a lot of times, like when we go into a house for a burglary, and it's just nasty, you never get results from that, just from the filth. And his car was pretty filthy.
Yeah. So the fingerprint tests came back negative on the car, and the SANE test came back negative for DNA in her mouth.
Correct.
You still believed her story at that point?
I did.
Detective Gregory, same?
Yes, after Kim kind of relayed everything, because Kim's done hundreds and hundreds of investigations, and she's got a good grasp on whether a victim's telling the truth or not. And just kind of the storyline that she told me, yes, I did, absolutely.
When did you find out, and how did you find out about the DNA test results? Like how long after the? I mean, how does that work? I don't know how it works.
They put a rush on this one, but it was a couple of weeks, I believe. I mean, it's not, you don't find out that day or the next day. It takes it was fast, and it was a couple of weeks.
So this was expedited. What is the usual sort of crime lab procedure on things like that?
Well, usually, I mean, we turn in a request to have something analyzed, and it takes months, sometimes longer.
And is that, I don't know, which is why I'm asking. Is it standard procedure, even if a rape victim says it was a certain type of sexual assault, to only test for, in this case, in her mouth, and not do the whole full array? Is that
That's
the policy
normal.
procedure?
I mean,
Yeah.
there's no sense in swabbing the inside of her vagina if it wasn't a vaginal assault.
Okay.
I mean, those SANE exams are not fun. They take the victims hours. We're not going to put them through certain tests that they don't need to be put through for grins and giggles. I mean, there's
You
no
don't
sense.
want to put them through another traumatic experience.
I see.
something Where she knew exactly where he touched, so there's no need to go.
So let's go back to the intersection that Daniel Holtzclaw stopped Janie Liggins at. And you sort of talked about how it's visible, it's high up there. For someone who has been described as a sociopath and a serial rapist, is that a good location to do what he was accused and convicted of doing?
It worked, so it wasn't bad. Would I do that? No, but you got to remember it was like 2 a.m. It's a big intersection. It's four lanes on either side. Janie only described one car that passed by. It's just not. It wasn't highly traveled that night. Plus, you got to think when a scout car pulls somebody over at 2 a.m. People aren't going to stop to see what he's doing. Nobody stops and says, why did you stop this lady, or what are you doing? He's just doing his job. Usually when people see a scout car on the side of the road, they just keep going. They don't want any part of it. Nobody's going to stop and gawk and see what the police saw. Now, people will gawk when there's a car wreck, but when an officer's just doing his job, nobody stops to analyze what he's doing. And there was only one car that passed by.
There's it looked like an office building where the surveillance video came from.
Yes.
How many surveillance cameras are in that building?
That one was that came from an outside camera, and I think there was one on each corner. And it I'm not even sure about the back. So on the front of the building, on the corner, and that came from the west side of the building.
And from what I'm told, there was an off-duty police officer that works in that building,
Yes.
Yes.
and he was there that night,
Yes.
Yes.
working for whatever private company, doing
Right.
something on the
Right.
side.
Right. Doing a little security job on the side.
And did he have a view of
No,
the street?
his office was in the back on the east side of the building, so it was on the northeast corner of the building.
Okay.
And I went in that office. There's the video surveillance cameras and things like that. I don't even think there was a window in that office.
Okay.
But even if there was, he wouldn't have been able to see.
Would Holtzclaw or other patrol officers in that division, wouldn't they have known that one of their fellow officers was in that building at the time? Because I'm told that they advertise for those kind of positions, and so that's.
I didn't
No.
know until this happened that we had off-duty officers in there.
So you didn't know that there were bulletin board postings for
No.
those kind of positions.
No, sometimes.
When did you find out that officer had been there? Did he come forward, or did you sort of uncover that in the course of the investigation?
That day we did when we went out there. That's when we figured it out. But you don't know what extra jobs. Some people have regular extra jobs that they've had for years, so they're not posted.
Right.
Or if some people have worked banks for years, they don't post those, and nobody really knows where other people work extra jobs unless you're my friend and I know, oh, she's working an extra job over here.
Right, right. So after the alleged assault, he let her go?
Yes.
Yeah.
He told her he was going to follow her home, which he did not. But yes, he let her go.
And she turned around,
She turned around
and
because she was going to get on the highway.
so she did go back to that route.
Right.
Okay. And then, did you ask her a little bit about what she did afterwards, and in terms of reporting what happened to her?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's general questions for us.
Yeah.
She drove home. She was going to call her daughter, but she thought she was missing her phone. She thought he must have taken it. But when she got home, she was sitting on it. She didn't know that. She thought her phone was gone, but when she got home, she was sitting on it.
Yeah.
So she went in and immediately told her daughter.
Her daughter was the first person she told?
Yes.
Okay. And so this friend was a male friend that she had come from, the house that she had come from?
It was a couple. It was a
Okay.
male and a female couple
And they were doing what?
playing dominoes.
Okay. And she had consumed some sort of pain pill or
No, she took over-the-counter sleeping pill that she gets at Dollar General.
before she got in the car?
She took a nap. She did do that, and she took a nap at their house. She was going to spend the night, but her and her boyfriend only have one car, and he had to be at work early in the morning, so she had to go home so he could have the car to go to work.
So then you interviewed the family members about
I interviewed her daughter.
okay, not the boyfriend?
Not then, not at the hospital.
Okay, but at
Later,
some later
right.
point. Right. And so at what point was he told, and by whom? The daughter or Janie Liggins about what happened?
I believe Janie told him, and it was then. By the time she got home, it was time for boyfriend to get ready to go to work. But I don't know the depth of the conversation, but he knew because I ended up later going up to his work to get the car processed.
Yeah, that was interesting to me because from what I understand, he told the police, he told you all that she woke him up, but then the daughter said that there seems to be some discrepancy about the chronology of who told what when.
And that all came out at trial.
Yeah, so can you explain that?
Things change at trial because of the time lapse, and everybody doesn't remember exactly the chronological order of I told my daughter, I told my boyfriend, my daughter woke my boyfriend up, my boyfriend woke my daughter up. And I think that happens in every case once we get to trial because it's a year later. And that was a fast trial.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 4 years later. So,
Yeah.
but that happens.
Can I read something that this caught my eye? This was in the Oklahoman series that was done after the trial.
Uh-huh.
And the writer describes basically your entree into the case. And it says, from experience, Davis knows this will probably come to nothing I guess when you were first alerted to Janie Liggins being at the hospital. Almost once a month, it seems the department gets a complaint like this against an officer, almost always involving a person upset over getting arrested. Did you get the sense when you were talking to her that she was upset about being pulled over?
No.
When you did the sit down with Daniel Holtzclaw, he mentioned, as she had mentioned, that she had asked, are you going to shoot me?
Correct.
Where did that come from?
Well, exactly. Because have you ever asked an officer if he's going to shoot her? Have you ever been pulled over and said, are you going to shoot me?
Well, I'm not black, and I don't live in a part of town like that, which is why I thought it was interesting to ask at the beginning if you thought that the climate in Oklahoma City lent itself to this kind of attitude towards the police.
No. And you're not white.
Yeah.
So have you ever asked an officer if he's going to shoot you.
Daniel Holtzclaw is not white either.
I know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so that all kind of blends in. When I interviewed Janie, she thought she was going to die. She continually and hysterically kept telling me, I'm going to die. I thought I was going to die. If he's doing this to me, he's got to kill me. He wouldn't do this to me if he wasn't going to kill me. And that's what was going through her mind during all this assault. And that's why, she said, if you picture it, he's got his penis in her mouth and his gun's right there. All she can see is his gun. And she asked him, are you going to kill me? I have never been asked that on a traffic stop, and I worked the streets for 11 years. Nobody has asked me, are you going to shoot me? That's an odd question.
Did you work in this part of town?
I worked where Rogers, I did not work the east side.
In the
but I
Spring Lake
worked,
Division?
I worked a black area in the northwest side of town.
Yes. So I just want to read the rest of this because I think it's interesting. Davis knows that most of the allegations prove false. Almost always, it's an angry suspect looking to get out of jail or get back at what they perceive as an overly aggressive cop. Those are a couple of reasons that you said that somebody might make up these allegations, because there's been a refrain throughout this case of why would these accusers lie, right?
Right.
And there are reasons that
People lie.
all the time. Now you said, as you pointed out, in Janie Liggins' case, she wasn't going to get a ticket. But are there circumstances around where she was headed, that might possibly explain why she would lie? Is there anything about the domestic situation of being out at 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe heading home or not?
I have no qualms or no questions about a traffic stop
Yeah,
at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's what police officers do.
yeah.
They pull, if they pull people over, where are you going at such a late hour? Why are you? I have no qualms with that. That is completely justifiable for an officer to do that. But it's not justifiable to put your penis in her mouth.
Obviously. At the end of this introduction, the reporter says she knows the truth typically works itself out pretty quickly, usually as soon as she interviews the alleged victim. Typically, liars can't keep their story straight. And at the same time, you said that things change at trial.
Correct.
So what changed in the 2 hours that Daniel Holtzclaw gave his interrogation about his side of the story versus all of the evolutions that happened in Janie Liggins and the way that what she said did not always reconcile itself with what the family member said?
Okay, you said a whole lot there, so are you asking what changed in Daniel's side of the story?
Number one.
A lot of things changed. A lot of things that we caught him in with his girlfriend, and then we said, no, that's not, we went out and called his girlfriend, said that's not true, and then he kind of changed his story, and then we went out and...
With regard to the allegations against him by Janie Liggins.
Oh, nothing changed. He admitted to pulling her over. He admitted to putting her in the back. He admitted to everything that Janie said except the sexual assault.
And the forensic evidence that this assault occurred, that he had put his hands on the top roof, that she had her hands on the hood, did not exist. The forensic there's no forensic evidence to back up what she said.
Correct.
And you still believe her, not him.
I do.
And is that because of I assume it's because of all of the other women that became a part of this case?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And some things that Janie had said too. I mean, she described how he drove after he pulled her over. That was on video surveillance. And when you have one victim, I believed her. but we don't always get things done when you have one victim, but when you have 13, and the MO's the same, and the verbiage is the same, it just becomes a little bit more believable.
A couple more questions about some of the procedure with regarding to Janie Liggins, and then I do want to talk about the other women that had come forward. Was there a reason why you didn't take his cell phone?
His cell phone?
Yes.
I didn't see.
There was no
What?
reason to do that?
No. What?
Okay.
Take it for what?
To look at who he called or what messages were on there, and no.
Even just looking at Janie, is because we only had Janie interviewed full-blown when we did this interview. There was never any allegation or any comment that he got her number, that he called her, that she called him. There was nothing to analyze his phone for.
So you didn't take his phone. What about his underwear?
Didn't take him.
Why not?
Daniel said that he had washed the underwear. He still had on the pants he had on the night previously.
And so you believed him that you believed that?
Yeah.
But you already had a sense that he did what Janie Liggins said that he did.
I did.
But you believed him that he had washed his underwear.
I guess believe and hope. Most people change underwear, usually. But he had told us this is the same uniform, so we took the uniform.
What about the other uniforms that were in his home? Did you think you should have taken those?
No, because we didn't have other victims at that point.
Right.
So we had the uniform that Janie was assaulted in. Why do we need another uniform? We don't have other victims that have been assaulted yet.
You talked to you mentioned that the story regarding the girlfriend had changed. And how long had you talked to that girlfriend?
Oh, I didn't talk to her for too long, 5 minutes max. While Rocky was out, or still talking to Daniel, I went in and called his girlfriend to ask her some questions relating to how he had answered some questions.
And you didn't have any other follow-ups with her to ask more about
I followed up with
behavior?
her later and met with her, and she gave a DNA sample after we knew that we had female DNA on his pants.
So at that point, you had been investigating him as somebody who had committed more than one of these sexual assaults.
After we got the forensics.
Okay, so that was a couple of weeks
couple
later,
weeks
you say?
later, yes.
Right. And so at that point, you were thinking that he was a serial rapist.
Well, I wouldn't call it that at that point yet. We just knew we had some female DNA on his pants that didn't belong to Janie. Mm-hmm. It could have been a girlfriend. It could have been, that's kind of why we asked, in case we got anything, do you have a girlfriend? Have you ever cheated on your girlfriend? We wanted to know his sexual contacts.
Did you also ask him about, since you had used these certain words to describe him, narcissistic, psychopath, was part of your interaction with her to delve into that more deeply about changes in behavior over the time that she had known him and over the course of how these allegations occurred?
Not on the phone.
Okay.
That night, no.
Gotcha. So at some point he said that he was very open during the interrogation about answering all your questions. He didn't lawyer up, right?
Right.
Right. And at that point he did agree to a lie detector test?
He did that night, yes.
Yeah.
Originally he did.
Yeah. Would that normally be the behavior of somebody who's accused of a sexual assault of a grandma?
We do have that happen.
Yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Child molesters to killers.
Yeah.
They're just trying to sell it to you. Hey, I'm innocent. Look what I can do. Remember, Daniel's also a cop, so he knows we can't use that in court too.
Right. So not a lot of people know who've only paid sort of cursory attention to the case, that it wasn't just Janie Liggins. I mean, she did become sort of the very public face, sort of as the prototypical target of Daniel Holtzclaw. But there were actually 3 women on that night, early morning. Can you talk to us more about that? Because, like I said, that when I first started looking into the case, that was shocking to me. I don't think a lot of people know the chronology of how all that transpired on that day and night.
His first that night was Adara, the one Gardner, the one that we got the DNA from.
That's the minor.
That was his first.
That's the 17-year-old
Right,
now.
she was 17 at
She's
the
now
time.
18.
She may be 19 now.
Yeah, that's right. That's for
Yeah,
2 years ago.
Right.
And has she come out publicly?
No, she's very shy. And you got to remember, all these women have issues. Drug issues, alcohol issues, prostitution issues, all of them.
Janie Liggins didn't.
No, she didn't. And that's what got the ball rolling. All the rest did.
Oh, all right. Since you brought that up, so Janie Liggins did not fit the profile of the victims that you came up with.
Correct.
I don't understand that.
He messed up.
He was also ramping up like we would see in a serial rapist. Okay? Him and I divided up, just to make it short, we divided up a kind of a timeline. Kim ended up working more victims because it was getting closer to that time. He had fewer victims earlier in the year, but he kept feeling more and more comfortable leading up to that night where he had 3. You asked about the 50th and Lincoln, how would he feel comfortable in that area? Well, by that time, I would say almost probably felt invincible. It just appears to us, and just trying to take a look at him.
And that's a normal serial rapist. If as they start, their assaults get less time between the assaults as they go on.
Is that sort of in the literature of?
But that's just from our experience in the serial rapists that we've worked. They might hit once and wait 2 months and then hit again, but then as it goes on, their time frame between assaults lessens.
I just want to go back. I know I asked this at the beginning, but how many serial rapists had you investigated before him?
I'd have to go back and look.
Like dozens?
Yeah. Yeah.
And okay. Okay, so continue, because I'm very interested in this question of how you developed the profile of his targets. So over the course of, he had been in the department for, what, 3 years?
3, I think.
3 years. And in the course of that, there were files and files of the people that he had pulled over. What, it was thousands, possibly, of people that he had.
Oh, possibly. He was a
interactions?
good worker.
Yeah, he was a hard worker.
He was a hard worker. He was always doing something.
So there were men, there were women of all races, of all socioeconomic status. At what point did you zero in on black women with a history of prostitution, drugs, and other crimes?
I'm trying to think if it was after we got the DNA back. But after we powwowed, if you will, on, and we only looked at black women because that's where he worked in the area. He worked on the black side of town. So that's where we started with. And what we did is anytime you check somebody for warrants, there's a log sheet. And we started with that log sheet and went hand searched, and we wrote down the name of everybody he ever ran through our crime information unit.
Okay.
Name, date of birth, and race. And we started with that log sheet. And that log sheet was hand searched more than once in case somebody missed something. I mean, we would take them home and search them and highlight and make copies, and that's where that's how we started with our trying to find other women. And then we compared the log sheets of all the people he checked for warrants to all the people he ran through our Varuna program, which is a separate program.
So you decided that he must have been targeting black women because he worked in an area where there were mostly black women, and then you excluded anyone who was non-black from that?
No, we got the log sheet first and saw everybody, 99.9% of the people that he checked for warrants were black. So, but we did contact, I know I contacted a couple of
contacted
Hispanic women.
White, I had white too. So it just wasn't, it's just, like I say, it was in the,
It was just demographics of where he worked on how it turned out to be mostly black women.
Do you think he was racist?
No.
no.
And so you think he targeted black women because they just happened to be in the area that he worked?
I think if he worked the South Side, he would have targeted Hispanic women. If he would have worked in our Asian community, he would have targeted Asian women. I think it's just where he worked.
A lot of the public perceives this case, though, through a racial lens. And, in terms of the social climate around the trial, this is what attracted the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of the groups that showed up at trial, because they saw it through a very specific, narrowly racially defined lens. This was a quote-unquote white cop
Right.
who targeted black women. But you're saying that if he had worked in the Hispanic area or the white area, that he would have.
That's what I think.
Yes.
This is popular right now.
Yeah.
The black versus white thing is popular right now. So, and people grab hold of that, of the popular thing. In 2 years, something else is going to be popular. I mean, so this is just popular right now, so it's grabbed hold of. I do not think he was racist. He dated black women in high school and college.
And you found that out through your investigation?
Through him and through an investigation. That was one of the questions we asked.
So you went back all the way to high school, all the way back,
We went back to
to
college.
Enid, and what did you find about any possible signs that he was narcissistic, psychopathic, somebody who would be capable of these kind of serial atrocities?
The most that we found, we didn't have anybody tell us he's narcissistic or that he was.
But you said that's how you described him, so.
That's from interviewing him for 2 hours, yes. That's how we perceive him,
As
yes.
far as back then, nothing pointed directly
To-
that he was that way. I mean,
Nothing pointed to signs that he was a narcissistic serial rapist? Like,
No.
nothing?
no.
No,
Is that unusual in your experience, that
No.
somebody, really, they
No.
have spotless,
No.
that you couldn't find a single person to
the most,
indicate that.
the most negative that we heard, like going back to high school and stuff, was that he was a stud football player and he got away with things because he was a stud football player. But not things like rape, but that he was a stud football player and his daddy was a cop and he got away with a little more than a normal person would get away with. That was the most negative thing that we had heard.
And in college, any signs that he would have abused women or abused power the way he allegedly did when he was a police officer?
We tried to find out if there was any complaints about him on the college campus, but there were not.
No signs of the kind of predatory behavior that he was
No.
accused of.
And some of the serial rapists we've worked in the past too.
No, they-
Clean background,
Yes.
nothing before, and all of a sudden, something got triggered off.
So he just, something
Something made
in the
him
last
snap. Yes.
2 years turned him into this
But
monster.
that's not unusual
No.
for us to see that.
Yeah, You've prosecuted there have been prosecutions and successful convictions of other serial rapists here, and
Yes.
yeah. Do you
Yeah.
have any examples of that?
But I worked a stud football player at Midwest City High School.
Another football player?
Yeah, stud
Do you,
football
do,
player.
do you
And
believe that there's, something about athletes that,
No,
Okay.
no, it just happened to be that one, and he had 9 victims, I believe. And he was a father, he was a football player, he had a job, he lost his job, and it seemed like after he lost his job was the only thing, he just snapped, and he started breaking into apartments and robbing and raping.
let's go back, because I want to finish this, because we sort of veered off here. That day and night, so you mentioned the 17-year-old, the minor, now 19-year-old. And then there was a second one?
There was a second one, Kayla Lyles.
And tell us more about her story, because a lot of people don't know what that was about.
She had gotten into an argument with her boyfriend and was walking in an area over there where it seems like he picked up a lot of the girls. And he stopped her, and checked her, and then the questions started. Do you have anything on you that you need to tell me about? If I search you and I find something, I'll take you to jail, but if you tell me about it now, then we're good. And then he drove her to a school, which is where a couple of the assaults took place, a vacant school, and assaulted her orally and vaginally.
So the first one was an alleged vaginal rape.
Yes.
And then the second one you just said was oral
And
and
vaginal.
vaginal.
Yes.
And then Janie Liggins was oral only.
Only.
And so at what point had you pieced all of that together, these 3 incidents all occurred? Because you obviously did not know that on the night
No.
that you interviewed Janie Liggins.
No, we didn't know that for a long time because we were still looking for, in fact, I found Kayla before I found Adara. And when I figured out that Kayla's was the same night, I was excited because I thought we've got our DNA match to the pants. And then it wasn't a match.
Dara was
like,
out of state at the time.
Yeah. When we were looking for Adara, she was out of state.
So tell me about that DNA, because it's been characterized as the DNA moment. When did you get that match for the 17-year-old?
We had to track her down, and we found her and got her buccal swabs. And then I cannot remember the
It was a few
day.
months.
It was
a while.
It was a while before we found her, got her swabbed, because she was apprehensive. She was out of state, then she was coming back, but she didn't come back, and so we had to wait on her. And then she was apprehensive about coming in for an interview,
And so the DNA came from where?
What do you mean?
Where did you get her DNA? Where was it on Daniel Holtzclaw?
Inside flap of his
Of his
pants.
pants.
So-
on a zipper.
Yeah.
And then on the inside, there's that flap.
Right.
It was on that.
And is that the only place that you had tested on his whole uniform, just that flap?
They tested all around.
So all around
crotch
the crotch area?
Yes.
Right. And it was what kind of DNA? Because, a lot of people, they watch all the cop shows and they think they know what's going on with DNA. Can you explain a little bit more about what the substance of that DNA
You
was?
can't determine. You can't say it was vaginal cells, it was oral cell. You can't say. You can just say it's Adara's DNA.
But it was skin cells.
But all DNA, I mean, if I get DNA from a man's ejaculation, it comes from the skin cells in the ejaculation. You can't say it's,
So you're saying that you can't determine whether it was vaginal or semen or saliva?
well, semen you can,
Yeah.
but from Adara, that the serologist can't say it was spit, it was vaginal fluids, it can't. That
So,
can't be
so,
done.
so it wasn't tested for, the DNA wasn't tested for those things because you're telling me that it can't be tested for those things?
Our serologists, they said there is one test that they can test for spit or saliva, but it can't be used in court, and I can't remember, there was another thing. And our serologist, when she testified in court, she said that the science isn't good enough yet. It may be
To
someday
specify,
to
right.
specify beyond a reasonable doubt or beyond that she can testify to that it's saliva, it's vaginal, it's anal, it's whatever. She can't do it. And I'm not the scientist. Rocky's not the scientist. We just go with what they
That's
tell
what
us.
testified to, was
Yeah,
exactly
cool,
that.
yeah.
Couldn't tell specifics.
And this DNA, it was matched to the 17-year-old.
Correct.
But you can't say whether it was skin or saliva or semen or vaginal
It's
fluid.
not semen because she didn't have semen.
Okay, right. All right, so,
You're correct.
all right. You couldn't say that it was any of those things.
But 100%, it's her DNA that
Uh-huh.
was there. But they can't testify to whether it was spit or skin cells, you know.
Then why did the prosecutor in his concluding statement essentially suggest to the jury that it did come from vaginal?
Well,
That would have to come from the prosecutor.
yeah. But I will say that.
But they did say that, correct?
I don't remember, we sat through 6 weeks of trial, but I'll say that Adara was not orally assaulted. So he might just be, she was only vaginally assaulted.
Now, she was the first of his victims
That day.
that day.
Yes.
And so she was the earliest of the three, and that's the DNA that showed up.
Correct.
And then Janie Liggins, who was the most recent, there was no DNA of hers
Correct.
found.
Correct.
Is that odd?
No, I mean,
No, I mean, you would think so, but it's really not because of how it's just how he put his penis up and it just,
And so the freshest assault would have no DNA, but the earliest assault would?
yeah, a lot of cases we might not even have
DNA.
I mean, that doesn't shock us that we have one and not the other. And, I mean, we do see that.
Is it possible that there's an innocuous and completely non-nefarious reason that the 17-year-old's DNA was on his pants?
on the inside of his pants?
No.
No.
He couldn't have gone to the bathroom, put his hands down there?
No.
But
It's-
Were the pockets of the pants tested?
No.
Why not?
Why?
Is it possible that the transfer of DNA cells from the 17-year-old to Daniel Holtzclaw came from random transfer or touch transfer?
I have not worked one sexual assault case and had transferred DNA.
Is it
it's-
possible?
Anything's possible. I would never say it's not possible. We've never been lucky. We are so thrilled when we get DNA in cases. I've never been lucky and got transfer DNA. I mean, look at, okay, for example, you're throwing out Janie was in the back of his car and there's no fingerprints and there's no transfer evidence of that. Transfer DNA is hard to get.
Very rare do we ever
I've
have
never had
even
one.
just DNA.
Yeah, I've never had a
Do you
transfer.
think it should be standard protocol to test, other areas to rule out that possibility?
Well, if we would have tested the knee of his pants, I can't say that came from a sexual assault. It's not. Does that make sense? I mean, you kind of have to use a little common sense here. If I can't test the cuff of his pants and say Adara's DNA was down there, that doesn't prove anything. But the inside of his pants, is a little bit more damning, if you will. And you mentioned pockets. She made no allegations of anything about pockets, but in a police uniform, our front pockets are very hard to get into because of the belt. Usually, did you ever put anything in your front pockets?
Yeah, it's a pain.
You can't get in there. And we go a lot with the victim's allegations. If she alleged, he put it in my mouth and I spit on his knee, I'm going to test his knee. But we go a lot with, but if there's not anything that points to why we should test the knee of his pants, we don't do it.
So you focused on the crotch area
Right.
because you were following the lead of what these victims
Right.
had said.
Right.
Did you fluoresce the pants? Is that something that's a standard procedure?
You'd have to ask the serologist. We don't. Once we take the pants and put them in a sack, we don't see them again.
No, we send it to the pros on that.
Okay, so you did not order, you did not ask them to do that.
We don't tell them how to test. I don't know how they test and if they fluoresce, and they have their procedures and their policy, and we just let them do.
And so you wouldn't have any input on that as the lead sex crimes unit investigators on what they should test for?
We just tell them what we're looking for, and they're the ones that kind of goes through the test. How they do it, how they go about to extract try to extract the DNA profile. They're the wizards.
That's over our head.
Right. But you tell them what you're looking for, and they narrow their testing based on what you tell them to look for.
Right. We tell them. At the first we go, we're looking for DNA. Let's check the crotch area. As things develop, we stay in contact with them. If a victim said, hey, test the cuff, then we call them and say, hey, we've got a victim saying this, test this.
I had a question, a couple of questions about some of the other victims, and Detective Gregory, you might be able to best address some of these, since you spent a lot of time interacting with these victims, these accusers, when you developed your profile of who you should look for, who you thought he was targeting, and then you went out after the Janie Liggins case came up to see if you could find other women who might have been targeted by him.
Right.
So Sherry Ellis was one of those women. Tell me about how you first came into contact with her and what that interview was like.
I remember Sherry, how we come across her. I was going back through after we had Liggins and Terry Morris. I was going back through looking at how many times that Daniel had pulled up Terry, and I found
Sherry or
sorry,
Terry?
Sherry. Sorry. I was looking at Terry, how many times he pulled up Terry, and I come across Sherry Ellis. And it was odd how many times he specifically pulled her up. I was getting ready to go on vacation, and I know Kim was getting ready to hit the streets looking for some, and I'm like, hey, you need to look at this. He was pulling up Sherry Ellis on like 3 different occasions, which was extremely odd.
Like in the same day. It was like 3 in the same day and then 1 the next day or something.
And I remember when I got back from vacation, you found her through social media, and you had already spoke with her. at
Wait,
that time.
you found her through social media, how?
I just started looking on Facebook, trying to find her. And
So you're pretty adept at that, searching social media and all that.
I'm decent at it. I'm
Better
not
than you would be at
at a cell
recording
phone.
a cell
Yes.
phone, yeah.
I'm
Okay.
decent at it.
Yeah.
I found a brother of hers, called him, and he got her to call me.
So this is after you had seen that Daniel Holtzclaw had contacted her or had interactions with her just a couple of times, and so you did that extra work of finding the brother to get to her.
That's how we found all of the girls.
All of them? All
Is-
13 or all 13?
I mean, yes, by
Well,
digging
excluding Janie Liggins, I mean,
Every
obviously.
which way we could use it, whether it's
Yes.
social media, neighbors where they used to live, we used every means
Fam-
possible.
Yes,
Every means possible to find these women who would make these allegations against Daniel Holtzclaw.
Not just
no, find women to see if they had any problems. I mean, keep in mind, we had 34 no's. We were finding everybody he'd come in contact with and ran through our computer and through warrants.
34
There's
no's.
34 no's.
No's. And then excluding Janie, 12 yeses?
We had another yes, but we did not file charges in that case. I had made an appointment to meet with her in Pauls Valley, and she didn't show up.
In where? I'm
Pauls
not-
Valley.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. Is that
South
ways
of
away?
the city.
It's an hour and a half away.
Okay.
She had moved, and so I made an appointment to interview her, and she didn't.
And
show up.
then from what I understand, there were an additional 7 whose allegations didn't hold any water with you all?
There was a couple during, and then some came like during the trial and after the trial.
After it hit the media, we really had to be kind of protective as far as just absolutely even just believing anything. We had to really kind of dissect because now it was out there. Some people thought of money or just wanted attention or however. I interviewed
So
one male.
Yeah. One male who said that
Who said that
Daniel
Daniel-
Holtzclaw. And what was the outcome of that?
He admitted he lied.
Yeah. So there are plenty of reasons to lie, including sort of,
Get out of trouble.
yeah, and money, as you said, was a big factor for people. I mean, they wanted to cash in.
After they saw it on the TV, they were like, "Ooh, I can get in on this." And
And this kind of case and these kind of allegations are sort of a magnet for people who are looking to cash in.
right,
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so take me back to Sherry Ellis.
You interviewed her.
yes,
We went out together.
right,
Was that the first time we found that it was a school?
yeah. We had her drive us. This is where he stopped me. And he stopped with her. Remember, by the crepe myrtles, and orally assaulted her.
She took us step
She
by
took
step.
us and then she said he stopped for his car right here, orally assaulted me. Then he turned here, he drove to this school, and that's where he vaginally assaulted her, and then let her go. And then he drove this way when he left.
We
And
pulled up
did the-
GPS and verified. See, our GPS, the way it works, and we found this out on that. That's began the GPS. Our GPS on our scout cars will show on the streets of Oklahoma City, but as soon as you leave the streets, let's say into a pasture or like in this case, school grounds, he jumped the curb onto the school grounds. It doesn't ping on GPS anymore. It will only ping, if you will,
On the street.
on the streets. So it shows him going to the end of the street, disappearing, then reappearing several minutes later on the other side.
Is there any other explanation other than that he sexually assaulted her that he would have pulled up off that curb and gotten off the street?
Not with her.
No?
I mean, no, not especially male, female. You don't do that.
Okay, so there's only one explanation for why the GPS would show that he left the street, and that only explanation was that he was sexually assaulting her.
Well, again, we were just verifying what she told us.
Yeah.
It's just like on Terry's deal. Sherry says, picks me up here, he goes up here to the corner, turns, I mean, step by step, and so we go and verify through GPS. The only how she would have known that is by being in the car.
Because you couldn't see that she couldn't have seen him drive that route and see without being in the car and know that without being in the car. There's explanation. If he didn't have, I'm sure there's guys that go up there and go to the bathroom, you know, but a male officer does not drive a female officer to an abandoned school and stay and not tell dispatch and not, there's no reason.
Unless he's sexually assaulting her? Is that what you're saying? There'd be no other, what if,
I'm going to interrupt here. I mean, they've answered it twice. And
sure, I know, but I'm kind
understand,
of
but
exploring.
I also understand kind of the tone this is taking, so it's
Yeah.
time to just move on to the next question.
Okay. Was Sherry Ellis the one that initially had described Daniel as a short black male?
Yes.
What was going on there, you think?
I think the lighting and the overheads change everything. When the overheads are really bright, and when you guys go out tonight, you ought to do that at night and turn on it changes the coloring of people, and it washes out, and you just can't
Would it
see.
change the height?
No, Sherry's a tall girl though.
Yeah.
She's a tall, thin girl.
She is tall.
For a girl. And no, it wouldn't change the height, but you gotta think of the trauma. I don't know that I would get the description right if somebody puts their penis in my mouth and then drives me to a school and rapes me. My description is gonna be so off the wall. I've had victims say they had blue eyes, and when I find them, they have brown eyes. The trauma does different things to different people's brains.
We've seen that before,
That's
like
not
different, even different races. I mean, and
Yeah.
we can prove she said it was a white guy, but it was a black guy because we found the DNA was semen.
Yeah.
So
It's
we've
not-
had that before.
I believe there's video of her, there is
Yes.
video of
and
her
we
interview.
always
Right.
ask for a description,
Yeah.
any victim, but we never follow it 100%.
Yeah.
Just
Well, Janie
because you
Liggins,
just
didn't
don't.
she initially say that Daniel Holtzclaw was blonde-haired
Yes.
and had pitted skin?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was
That's-
trauma too, that you think that?
That's when we found out too, when we went to Spring Lake to get Daniel, the captain over there said, everybody has blonde hair in these lights.
They're just so bright.
Sherry Ellis had described Daniel Holtzclaw as the short black man under oath. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And then at some point, she realized that this half Japanese guy who was much taller than her was actually the one that had assaulted her.
Right. But that just goes a little bit more to her credibility too. She had known, it's been all over TV, but she still testified under oath that she told detectives it was a short black man.
Can you tell me about your interaction, Detective Gregory, with Carla Raines? And how she came about? Was it very similar that you had sort of searched her out as well and found her that way?
I tried to make phone calls just like we did with any women on this massive list.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I finally made contact with her by phone. I think she returned a call, like she was staying at her grandmother's house. And I asked if I could speak with her. Went over there. She was in front of her grandmother, and I just simply asked her, I'm like, hey, I'm investigating a situation. Have you ever been had any issues with any officers? And in the beginning she said no, but her grandma was there. And then there at the end, she's like, hey, hang on a second. Can we talk privately? I'm like, sure. So we step over to the side, and she's like, well, there was one incident. And then she goes into that she was stopped, and she had to expose her breast to an officer. And she tried to describe as best she could. And then I verified, it was Daniel. And that's kind of how it went. She did say no in the beginning, but it was because she didn't want her grandma to hear it. And we
Did
do
she
have
tell you that?
I spoke with her a couple times. I know that she kind of alluded. I just knew that that's what the reason was when she said she wanted to speak in private.
So she had basically denied several times that she was a victim. You're saying it's because she didn't want her grandma to know?
Yes,
And you're assuming that, or she told you that? I'm just.
Well, just in speaking with her, I did gather that because she wanted to speak in private. At the time, I could tell she was really nervous. She's had a past history, getting stopped by the police. She had that normal history with officers, or sorry, she had that normal past history of, drugs and everything else like we've been seeing. And I just gained rapport with her, and I think she felt more comfortable that's why she took me aside, and we spoke alone, and she told me what happened.
I can't remember, what was the outcome on the verdict of those charges?
They did not, that was not guilty on her.
So you believed her, but the jury didn't.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
Just, I think it probably went back to the no, she's saying no. They didn't have the interaction like I did with her. I know what happened during that time. I could tell it was an audio recording, is what I had. So they didn't really get to see her actions and how it was. And we interview people all the time, so we can kind of tell by body language and how they're acting and things. I believed her just by how she was just going through the process. Mm-hmm. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it. She's actually the one that came out and told me, it's like, well, the reason I didn't tell is because whenever you speak with the police, you're kind of labeled as, a snitch. Said it's not repercussion from other officers ratting on another officer, it's repercussion on the streets. Mm-hmm. Because now everybody starts looking at you, you're talking with the police.
So there is a culture in that part of town in Northeast where a lot of these women don't want to be seen with the cops, and that anti-snitch culture is very strong.
Yes.
So would that not be a reason for a woman who is either being interviewed or pulled over or just chatted with as a part of, say, aggressive community policing to go off the street with a police officer in their car?
It's against policy.
It is against the policy.
Yes.
And so
a male officer mm-hmm. has, if he picks up somebody of the opposite sex, and a female that picks up a male, mm-hmm. they have to say, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm going, this is my starting mileage, and this is my ending mileage.
So other police officers, say in the gang unit, who would use those kind of community policing techniques would be punished for the kinds of things that Daniel seems to have done.
Against policy. That's all she's going to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know about punishment.
Yeah,
It's against policy.
Right. I just want to go back to something you said about your interaction with Carla Raines. You said that you got to see her. You got to see her face, and the jury didn't. And you also said that the audio plus video of seeing how she described what happened to her would have been more persuasive to the jury?
Not necessarily. I know I've done lots of interviews. I mean, a normal juror doesn't know the type of body language to look for and telling the truth or lying and stuff like that. I'm just trying to relay what I saw, what mm-hmm. I perceived, and just interviewing lots of victims, mm-hmm. hundreds of victims over time, is that Carla had come from a rough life, and in her mind it's just something that happened, something she was just trying to get through and go on. She didn't like I just gathered she didn't want to make it public of what happened to her, and that's understandable. Most victims, that's why we try to get them to go aside, or we try to interview them alone, so they'll be more comfortable. They don't want to feel judged. So a lot of victims do feel like they did something wrong, and in reality they did nothing wrong. And that's just kind of to me she did kind of fit the criteria of what I've seen in lots of victims.
Did you feel that same way about Shardarian Hill?
Yes, I did.
And the jury did not feel the same way, though, did they?
The jury did not.
Yeah.
Um,
Do
we-
you believe what she said happened in the hospital happened?
Yes. Yes, I do.
The jury didn't.
No.
I think was it you who interviewed her towards the end of that? I believe I watched the whole thing, where she said something like, even if he didn't rape people, what was that? Even if he didn't rape nobody, he still shouldn't be in contact with people he's arrested. Do you remember her saying that?
This was at trial?
No, at the end of her interview with you all.
It's been a while. I don't
Yeah.
know if I remember that one.
What would explain a comment like that? And she did say that.
Tell it to me one more time.
Quote, even if he didn't rape nobody, he still shouldn't be in contact with people he's arrested. Because
Well-
obviously, I mean, I did look at that particular case, and the Facebook contacts had come up between the two of them and all that.
It's hard to say what Shardarian. Shardarian's another one who's had a real rough life. I don't want to misquote her and what she was speaking about then. She could have been talking about anybody out there, even if they're not a rape victim. He shouldn't have any control. He shouldn't be out there. That's how I perceive it.
I see. So after all is said and done, you had 13 accusers. Half of the charges were rejected by the jury, half. How would you respond to the criticism that the jury just split the difference, and that would explain a lot of why some of these verdicts didn't seem to make sense?
I know that some of the not guilties,
Yeah.
like I know on Kayla, for example, when she testified, her order of event, there was oral and vaginal on Kayla. How she told it to me when she testified, she told it different. She thought the oral happened first, then she thought the vaginal happened, but then she thought, and the defense attorney, who did an excellent job, brings out those, well, you didn't get it right, you said this, and so that puts a doubt in the jury's mind. And so I think that they're more comfortable, well, she can't remember the order of events, so we're going to find it not guilty. And I think that happened with a lot of the girls.
They studied, obviously, they studied each woman. They didn't take all 13 and just clump them together. They studied each case individually. And some of them they did. They split the baby on them.
They split the baby. Is that justice?
Well, that's how they perceived it.
Yeah, there's no telling what all. I wish I could have been a mouse in the room when the jury was, just to see, what they talked about and how they came up with what they came up with. I wouldn't have wanted their job.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would have.
No, that was a tough job.
But I just, that's an interesting phrase that you use, because splitting the difference when you're talking about the fate of a man's life, police officer or no, doesn't really seem to be how the justice system is supposed to work.
Watch this officer, hear about how clean cut he was in the past as a football player, everything like that.
And see his family
see his
sitting
family
in
day
there.
after day. So they start having that kind of a bond, even though they don't get to talk or interact. They start having this bond. I felt like they did struggle with having to do exactly like that. And this is a police officer. There's somebody that, in this community, they do respect officers and things like that. Now the task is on them to send this guy away for the rest of his life.
And you've got girls that, because he picked the right kind of girls. Their morals are terrible, their ethics are terrible, their lifestyle's terrible, and it's hard to care about them.
Yeah, so you're saying that he picked the perfect victims, but could it not also be the case that these were in some way the perfect accusers?
No.
No.
No. No. I mean,
So you're 100% certain, beyond a reasonable doubt. You're 100% certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Daniel Holtzclaw is guilty of all the things that he was charged with, not just what the jury picked and
Absolutely.
chose.
Yes.
Every single
100%.
last
Yes.
one. You have no doubt in your minds. Do you believe that the streets of Oklahoma City are safer without Daniel Holtzclaw on them?
Yes.
And you believe to this day that he's all those things that we said at the beginning of the interview?
yes.
Yes.
A sociopath,
Yes.
a serial rapist,
Yes.
a monster.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you think that the jury felt any pressure to, as you said, split the baby in its decision because of the social climate around the trial?
It's hard to second guess.
Yeah, we talked to some of them afterwards, and
You did.
yeah, they get to stick around. They get to, after trial, they get to stick around if they want to. They get to ask questions. The defense attorneys can ask them questions. The prosecutors can ask them questions. I don't think that they felt the social climate. That I don't think that was a part of. They didn't talk like that was a part of it.
Even though they could hear them, the protesters outside chanting and...
They
and-
got those protesters out of there pretty fast when that started. David Prater got with the main lady for Artists of Justice, who is a phenomenal woman, and said, hey, this can create a problem. And she moved them out. She was a great liaison
Very good. For the community.
for the community. She's fantastic.
I have two last questions, and then if there's anything else that you'd like to say that I hadn't asked about, I want to give you a chance to do that at the end. So you mentioned talking to the jurors. There was one juror actually who made news, Ron Hill, for making a claim that he was told that the prosecution had even more evidence than they presented. Do you recall that?
I'm trying to think which one what did he look like?
I don't remember what he looked like.
'Cause was he interviewed on TV?
Yes, this is
Kind of a big guy?
This is afterwards, and he said, I believe he was called in to talk to the judge about it. He said that the
Yes,
prosecution
I know, I
had
think.
told the jury in an effort to reassure them that they had made the right decision, that the prosecution had even more evidence than they presented.
Yeah, I remember
Do you
him
do-
getting called into the judge, but
Yeah.
I don't think it was about that.
I know what you're thinking of, and I
Yeah.
don't think that's quite matching up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I
think
just
it was
wanted to
about
know if you
that.
had, if that had gone on
That
your
was
radar
before
screen.
sentencing, I think.
My
too, so.
final question is, do you think that there's anything, as police officers, well, as retired now, that the department should do to adopt policy changes to prevent what happened in this case?
Policy changes, this is my opinion, they're not going to, he violated policy. You can have policy, but if somebody wants to violate it, they can violate it
Well,
all day long.
how about this? Would dash cams deter something like this from happening again?
Yeah, I am very pro dash cams and body cameras, and I think that does help keep everything in line. I think with Daniel, he would have probably found a different way. Just like that day with Liggins, he turned off everything. He violated
duty.
policy.
Right, that's come up many times, but is it not the case that he did that routinely, and there were no consequences for him doing it routinely, as opposed to what you seem to be suggesting is that he only did it to cover his tracks in these particular cases?
No, he routinely violated policy.
Right.
I'm saying,
But now who monitors that, I don't know. You know,
well, I'm just saying.
So wouldn't that be a policy change? If he hadn't been punished for that previously, shouldn't he have been?
He still would have. I mean, his
But
There's
the
a will,
answer,
there's a
what is the
way.
answer to that specific question that I just asked? If there are other officers that are doing these kinds of routine violations, shouldn't those have been addressed earlier?
I can't, I don't feel like I can answer that because I don't know who, I just work, we just work our case. I don't know who monitors that, who notices that they do that, and who delves. I don't know how that works. So I really can't effectively answer that question. I just know if you're going to violate policy, you're going to violate policy. Now, who handles all that? I mean, I know who handles it, but how it's monitored, I don't know how logging off your computer is monitored and if it's checked and if were you home when you logged off. I don't know who does all that.
So you think dash cams and body cams would help?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And I think it helps us quite a bit.
Yeah.
I know on even recent cases where we've had some experimentation with body cameras, it has extremely helped the officers and also a jury to also see kind of what we're seeing, what the officers see too.
And just in terms of the policy with regard to crime labs and DNA, you had indeterminate DNA. In other words, you can't say whether it was vaginal, semen, skin. That was the 17-year-olds on the fly, correct?
Right.
That has policy implications, not just for this particular cop, but for anybody. Because if it was the case that this was innocuous touch DNA or transfer DNA,
DNA plays a big part in it, and that's, why? Because everybody watches CSI and expects all these, great things with DNA and everything, so everybody wants this physical evidence. It's one piece of the puzzle. It's a big piece. It's probably the final piece that went in the puzzle to complete the puzzle, but it's only part of it.
but that was the reason that in the concluding statement, the prosecution emphasized that piece, that the last thing that the jury heard was talking about how the 17-year-old's DNA he posited was vaginal. He said that.
That's just a good trial lawyer then.
Yeah. And
And oh well, whether it was true or not.
and there again, the jury didn't just look at the DNA. They didn't have DNA for the other 12. They individually, as we saw, like we split the baby, they individually looked at each case, and 12 of them, they didn't have DNA. So they just went off of the evidence that was put before them and come up with a not guilty or guilty, thus resulting in a 263 years.
Splitting the baby in some cases where these verdicts made absolutely no sense at all.
On a couple.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking as much time as you did. I know you're busy and you're enjoying, enjoying your retirement, so thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Yeah, the DNA piece of it really does fascinate me. I think that the development in forensic science is just going so fast. I mean, if I shake your hand and I end up doing this.
Good, I get felt up.
Well, transfer DNA.
You probably won't get anything. We don't get it.
We just
We
know.
don't get transfer DNA.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to say this on recording and not to gross you out, but you got a 17-year-old and sex, and they get moist, and it's just more fluid transfer, and you're gonna have more of a chance of getting sloppy sex remnants on your pants.
So you're saying
From
that's
that.
then the other two that came
Yes.
later on?
Yes.
You're saying that she
You have to
was,
have a profile too, and that's the thing. Touch skin, well, she's already touched, you know, her husband, her son. There's so much mixture there. You have to have
And mixture,
specific
you can't
profile
use
for one.
mixtures. You can't use mixtures. You have to have a strong, like you, now I shake Rocky's hand. Now there's a mixture of Rocky, of you,
and then
of
if
me,
I shake your hand,
and you can't use any of that.
yeah.
You have to have a solid profile that they say is one person. And you're gonna get the best from a 17-year-old.
Our serologist preaches it all the time. Transfer DNA is just almost but impossible right now with what we have.
With science today.
Wasn't it true though that, and I just remember this, that there wasn't they had to replicate the amount that they did have for her? Is that right?
That
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, because I was looking at some of the documents from Discovery, and I believe they had to replicate it because it was such a small amount. Again, it just pointing to how tricky that
The
area
science,
of
yeah, the
science is.
science stuff's over my head, so I don't get that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, guys.
Y'all be careful going
You all know how to get out. and
Yep,
get out front of
we'll
the
go out there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Holler if you need something.
All right, thanks.